Thank you.
Okay, moving on here. Welcome everyone. We got a full class tonight. This is going to be great. Let me get the Zoom settings just all set up so we don't have anybody chiming in here. And okay, let me get our notes. All right, tonight we are going to do a class specifically on torsion. Normally when we have these group classes, it's just about movement in general. And I guess this could fall into that category. So I'll kind of give an overview of what torsion is and how we're going to do that. But before I really dive into tonight's schedule, is this anybody's first time to their live session? And if it is, you can go ahead and type in the chat box. All right, we got one, maybe two or three. Well, welcome. My name is Vinny. I'm going to be running our class tonight. Just a quick overview. I'm probably going to talk for about 10 minutes, maybe even less, maybe more. Sometimes I like talking a lot. I'm going to set up the intention of what we're going to do tonight. Plan on about 45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer of actual movement. We're going to all go through a movement routine together. And then I'm going to stick around for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour after to answer all of your questions kind of in this group setting format. My main intention for this class is to just support everybody on this call. So whether you have a question about tonight's class, any of the exercises, or any of the things that you're experiencing with your body through the program, again, my goal is to just support you and make sure that you're clear on what needs to happen for you to move and feel your best. So think about if you have any experience that you want to talk about with any of the exercises, that would be a great entry point to us talking about that at the end. What's challenging with this work, we've got 19 people on the call tonight. We all have 19 completely different movement patterns, 19 completely different past history of injuries, dysfunctions, compensations. We're all different. So I'm going to put together a movement routine that's going to be general enough that adheres to the rules of movement for most people, but that doesn't mean every movement's going to feel amazing and great for you based on how you're experiencing movement. So my ask of you is to not push anything. Don't force it. I want you to go into tonight's routine with kind of a playfulness. Just let's explore maybe movements, ranges of motion, planes of motion, something a little different than I'm maybe normally used to. And in that discovery, in that playfulness, we might just kind of have an aha moment or maybe see things with a little greater clarity. So that's kind of the intro for those people who are new. And if you have any questions, you can just type them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them while also kind of still sticking to the group format. Last thing I want to bring up before we get started, and I don't really normally do this. In fact, I've never actually asked for this, but I'd like to call upon the community. We've been doing these live classes for, I want to say, I think 1.5 years. I think that sounds right. And if I've had a positive impact in your life, if this program has made a difference and you feel like your movement has changed, your quality of life has changed, I would love to just schedule some time to sit with you and talk to you. I want to kind of interview how you've made this work for you and what kind of changes this had on your life. I get a lot of questions from people who are not members. They're really timid. And I get it because I think we've all done things and we've done a lot of things that haven't worked. And to a lot of people, this is just another thing. And there's that fear of it not working. But this is a really great track record. And I think I can only say this stuff so much that this is great. It works, it improves function. But I think coming from the people who are doing it every day, maybe somebody other than myself, that would be really powerful. And I think it would kind of push people who are maybe on the edge of uncertainty to maybe actually dive into something that could fundamentally change their life. So if you would be open to that, and if you'd be interested in that, then maybe type in the chat box that you'd be available for that. And I'd love to set up some time that we can do it. Okay, cool. That's about it. The equipment that we're going to need tonight. Awesome, Steph. I would love to do that with you. Love to get more time with you. You know that. Okay, Christy, we're in too. All right, you guys are making my day. That's wonderful. I don't expect it, but it's appreciated. My goal is to, as you can all tell, I want to help. I remember what it was like being so lost and stuck and frustrated and confused for years, and then finally coming upon this information and just mad. I was tens of thousands of dollars into the hole with trying to change movement and corrective exercise, and all of a sudden it's like this. And where was this information when I first got hurt? And so I really want to try to get this to people earlier in the injury cycle to help make a difference. So thank you for everybody that is open. That's awesome. That's like 5 or 6 people already. You guys are great. The equipment that we need tonight is going to be a yoga block. If you don't have a yoga block, grab a foam roller or even a shoebox. That works too. We're going to need a strap. So just a fabric, a yoga strap. If you don't have a strap, maybe a regular fashion belt will work, or a dog leash, just something we can tie up around your legs. And we're going to need a chair. So I want everybody to grab those 3 things while I kind of set up what we're going to do. I talked last week about torsion, or I didn't even talk about it. A couple members had brought up the fact that when their knees are pointed forward, their feet are rotated out, or when the feet are pointed forward, the knees are rotated in. And it was kind of a common theme at the end of last week's class that a lot of people were experiencing torsion. So that's what tonight's going to be about. It's a class specifically on what that is and how we can deal with that and start to correct that. Even if you don't have torsion, this can still be a very helpful class because the rules of movement and function still apply to you, whether you have a twisted joint or not. So let's do a high-level overview. Torsion is probably something a lot of us are actually experiencing it, whether we can really identify it or we've had that diagnosis or not. A very simple way to talk about torsion, it is when one bone is twisted relative to the bone above it or the bone below it. I'm going to share my screen really quick. I'm going to show a visual because I'm a visual person too. So let me show what this looks like. I'm going to share my screen with everybody. Okay, can everybody see this? Cool, okay. Let's pull this up. This is obviously an extreme case, but maybe not, because I think some people on this call might be dealing with something just like this. Excuse the pixelated image. So as we can see, the feet are pointed straight, but the knees are pointed in, or the knees are pointed straight and then the feet rotate out. This is what torsion looks like. It's when the bones are twisted. And in this case, the relationship is the shin bones, the lower legs, are either twisted in or twisted out relative to the position of the knee. What makes torsion somewhat difficult to address and treat is the level of variation that can happen with torsion. There isn't a black and white rule book. When the hip rotates in, the lower leg rotates out. There are so many combinations of how joints can have torsion in them. Some of them follow the rule books, some of them break the rule books, and some of them are kind of one-off conditions that happen from congenital issues or just really traumatic impact injuries. Torsion events can happen for a variety of reasons and impact your movement in a variety of ways. So that's just a quick little visual of what torsion can actually look like. The really good news is when there's torsion, your joints are in those positions because they can be. So it's actually nothing abnormal. There's joint tolerance. There's a play in each of our joints in their ability to kind of shift and twist a little bit. It's this joint tolerance that gives us the ability to move when we're injured. If our joints didn't have the play or the ability to kind of twist and rotate or have some space in between them to shift around a little bit, the moment we got injured, we'd stop walking. We'd immediately stop moving. What we're looking at when it comes to torsion is what happens when we kind of live at that threshold of joint play, where the joints don't really come back to neutral. They kind of stay at that end range of how much wiggle room there is. and they stay in these kind of stuck, pointed, or externally rotated positions. There is no bad position, just like posture. There's no bad posture. If your body can get into a position, it was designed to get into that position. The only time it becomes problematic is when we can't get out of that position. So you can sit any way you want, but if when you go to stand, we're still locked in this chair position, that's when posture becomes a problem, because we can't return back to baseline. Torsion becomes a problem when the joints can't return back to baseline and they stay in this kind of deviated, twisted, or rotated position. Please let me know if there's any questions on that. So that's torsion in a nutshell. Now, I've prepared a movement routine for us to explore torsion and hopefully undo or unwind those torsion effects. But before we do that, I want to talk about two things. I'm a firm believer we can't change a problem unless we understand a problem. So bear with me. I'm going to do a very light overview of biomechanics and kinesiology. And I want you to then use this information to frame why we're doing the exercises we're going to do tonight. So the first thing that I want you to understand is there are planes of motion. There's 3 planes of motion. Every human being moves in 3D. We're 3-dimensional human beings. We can go forward and backward. That's one plane. We can go side to side, raise our arm up out to the side. That's another plane. And we can twist. We call upon all 3 of these planes of motion to move, to walk, to stand. Basically, all human movement is us tapping into a variety of all 3 of these planes of motion simultaneously, for the most part. Why that's important to understand is if you have torsion, that's one plane of motion, that's that twisting plane of motion that's become excessive. When there's one plane of motion that becomes excessive, it's typically because the other 2 planes of motion are unavailable, meaning the ability to move forward, to flex and extend, it's not really happening too much. The ability to shift sideways, abduct and adduct our arms and our hips, it's not really happening much. So how your body creates motion is by pulling what plane of motion you have a lot of availability from. And for some people, if not most people with torsion, that is the rotational, the horizontal, the transverse plane of motion. When we become kind of deficient, not well-rounded in all 3 of those planes of motion, that's when flat feet enter the picture. This is when knock-kneed or bow-legged, hips not being able to rotate, a hip not being able to extend. Basically, if you have a movement problem, if your joints movement is affected, we have to look at what plane of motion is really missing from this body that's causing dysfunction, disease, or disruption. So now that we have those 3 planes of motion set up, you're going to find that the exercises we do tonight is us tapping back into some of those planes of motion. If we wanted to be very well-rounded, we would probably do a 2-hour routine tonight, and we would take every joint through all 3 planes of motion. I've just, for the sake of not giving you a fire hose of information, I've kind of reduced which planes and how we're going to do it to probably the most available and accessible ones. So that's that. So now we have the 3 planes of motion kind of understood on the surface. We now need to talk about degrees of freedom. This is the kicker. This is the thing that will help all of us move and feel our best. Here's what a degree of freedom is. If I flex and extend my wrist, this is 1 degree of freedom. If I abduct and adduct my wrist, this is 2 degrees of freedom. My wrist has 2 degrees of freedom. Every joint in the body has a specific number of degrees of freedom. For example, the elbow can flex and extend. That's 1 degree. And it can also rotate a wrist. That's 2 degrees. Each joint we have has a specific number of degrees in which it can move. And I'm not talking about range of motion. I'm talking about the act of motion, okay? Our hip joint has 3 degrees of motion. We can flex, we can extend, we can move it out, in, rotate it in or out. We've got 3 degrees of motion in the hip. Where things get interesting is the knee joint, which is where torsion is most likely present in the vast majority of people. The knee joint is the largest joint in the body, and it's the most complex joint in the body. The knee joint has 6 degrees of motion. What makes the knee a complex joint is, unlike the hip, the ball and socket that has the pelvis, think about the hip joint that goes into our pelvis. The hip has our pelvis to be stable, these really big bones with tons of muscles around them. Our foot has the ground that it can be stable. So our foot and our ankle uses the ground to be stable. But what does the knee have? The knee has 2 bones that come together like this. There is nothing around it other than muscles, ligaments, and tendons. There's no big bony structure or hard ground to keep the knee stable. The knee crucially relies on all of the musculature around it to provide adequate stability, mobility, range of motion, flexibility. We're talking function. And it's because the knee joint has so many variations in how it can move. It can flex, it can extend, it can rotate in and out. It can go knock-kneed, or it can go bow-legged. When it's bent, there can be translation forward, backward, rolling, anterior, posterior. We are talking about so much variation in knee movement. This is why a lot of us have knee issues, because there's a wide range of ways in which that knee can move. Let me know if that makes sense. So why is that important to know for anybody on this call? When we lose any degree of motion in our hip or our ankle, the knee is going to pay the price for it. If we can't flex and extend the hip, if we can't abduct it or adduct it, internally or externally rotate it, that problem is directly going to yield itself in the knee. The knee is interdependent on how the hip and the ankle work together. The hip and the foot give the knee the orders of how to move. So if the foot can't move, or it's lost some plane of motion or some degree of freedom, and if the hip has lost some plane of motion or degree of freedom, we are going to take that out immediately on the knee. The knees aren't going to be able to flex to their full range. They're going to stay in twisted positions. The 2 bones are not going to come together and sit on top of each other. They might shift out, creating a wearing effect on one side more than the other. This is why knee replacements are so common. The knee joint needs a lot of help. Please let me know if there's any questions on what I said before I go forward. I want to make sure I'm just not rambling and talking a bunch here. Somebody asked, okay, Gretchen, great question. So do they stay in the deviated position because of muscle tightness? Yes, and muscle control. So muscle tightness, just a muscle imbalance. If one side of the knee is stronger or tighter than the opposing side, just the natural law of physics is going to come in and push that knee towards the weaker side. The weak side can't really hold that knee in place. So a knee or joint could stay in a torsion position due to muscular tightness, but it also has to do with neuromuscular control. You could not be tight. I've worked with a lot of yogi masters who can twist and manipulate their body in so many crazy ways. I wouldn't use the word tight to define them at all, yet they have significant torsion in their knees because of how their neuromuscular, how their neural system controls the muscular system, how it talks to muscles, and how it organizes movement is by twisting and rotating the joints more than actually using all 3 planes of motion. So there's a variety of reasons why a knee stays in torsion. This is why stretching alone does not resolve torsion. It can help, but if we don't change the way that the body organizes movement, like what we're going to do tonight, torsion is going to exist indefinitely. We can stretch, but we also have to activate and teach that knee how to integrate motion back in with the entire body. And that's what we're going to do tonight. Cool. I think that's enough of an intro, hopefully without, I don't see anybody sleeping. So I think we're all on board still. All right. We're smiling. We got a pulse there. We're alive. Let's do it. All right, so let's make sure we all have our equipment. Let's get into our movement for tonight. So again, we need a yoga strap, a yoga block, and a chair. And why don't we go ahead? I'm gonna move this. Let me just grab my charger and we're good to go. Okay. What would be helpful, just so I can kind of cater some info, if you do have torsion or you feel like your legs are kind of twisted, I'd love for you to share how. Do you always feel like your knee is twisted in? Is it a twisted out knee? What is the position of your foot? So maybe I can kind of cater some of this information to you specifically. So if you have that info, that'd be great. If not, no problem. Okay, we're gonna need some floor space and a little bit of wall space. So let's make sure we got some room. And from here, okay, right foot turned out. Okay, so we've probably got a lot of foot rotation, external rotation. Great, this is great, everybody. Let's go ahead and stand up. And as always, before we move, let's test our movement first. Now, for the sake of torsion, we are going to test knee movement. The first thing I want you to do is just kind of maybe stand up, march up and down in place a little bit. Let's just get a little loose and relaxed. And after you do a couple marches, just kind of hang out here for a second. And I want you to just, first of all, look down. Do you see that torsion event? Are both knees and feet pointed in the same direction? You could have the whole leg have torsion, right? Which is just the femur the leg is rotated out, or you can just have part of it. Just assess, what is this natural alignment of your leg bones? And once you have a sense of that, we're gonna very subtly go pigeon-toed. Big toes touching, heels out to the side. Now, ideally, if we have this degree of freedom, this seems pretty effortless. Both ankles, knees, and hips can rotate inward when we ask them to rotate. I want you to take a second here to kind of collapse the arches. Let's not have high arches. I want you to push the inner foot down. Use those leg muscles to straighten front thigh, straighten the legs, and just hang out a second. I want you to assess, what is your ability to rotate the ankle, knee, and hip simultaneously. One of two things is happening. Either this feels functional or it doesn't. Maybe one hip, one knee, one ankle, or both sides are saying, wait a second, this is a little weird. I don't know if I can do this right now. It's off. Make a mental note of that. And then keeping a little bit of space between your feet so the heels aren't touching, then I want you to externally rotate both feet. Take a second here as you're externally rotating both feet. What's this feel like for you? Is it a normal, natural position? Or is like one hip shaking or working or cramping or talking to you? How do both feet, knees, and ankles feel when you're asking the entire leg structure to rotate together? If you can, share in the comments. I'd love to just hear what a very simple internal and external rotation feels for you. Maybe break it down numerically. If you give yourself a 10 out of 10, so rate yourself 1 to 10. If you give yourself a 10 out of 10, easy, simple, no problem, no discomfort, you felt both legs being able to do that really smoothly. Maybe if you were like a 1 out of 10, it was painful. We just couldn't rotate in one direction, or there was a significant severe imbalance. Okay, internal rotation is uncomfortable, 3, internal rotation. So you see how we're kind of looking at one of those degrees of motion. It makes sense if internal or external rotation is a problem, and there's also pain when moving, or discomfort, or things just feel off, or torsion. Okay, nice, Penny. I like that you observed how both sides function, how you rated that on both sides. Both sides, okay, toes and upper body. This is great. We're going to come back to the same thing later tonight at the end of the movements and test it. Okay, now let's go into another test. I do not want anybody to push this. We are going to do a very basic squat. First of all, keeping both feet pointed forwards and knees forward. If you have torsion, I want you to find what is kind of like a gentle forward, because for some people it's either or, either the knees are forward or the foot's forward. Find some kind of sense of the joints are pointed as forward as they can be. And without putting effort into it, I just want you to squat down. And maybe for some of you, that's just this. This is as much depth as we have before it feels really uncomfortable. You're testing how the knee, ankle, hip, and pelvis work together. Can the ankles, knees, and hips stay in this parallel position? Do we have to bring rotation in? And the only way we can squat is by twisting everything out and our knees go wide? Or can they bend pointing forward and it feels comfortable? Rate how this feels on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 is alignment, simple, we can hang out here all day. A 1 might be, oh my God, I can't even, like, just an inch hurts. Rate what function feels like for you. And then we'll get moving. I swear that's enough talking. I don't think I've ever talked 30 minutes before we've got moving before. Okay, so we got 2.5, 3, 4, 2 out of 10, 4, 4, snapping hip, 5, staff full range of motion. Only when you introduce another plane of motion, we can talk about that later. Anel 5, Kev 8, TK 4, halfway down. Okay, great. This is excellent observation, everyone. 5, very restricted. Everybody ready to move? We done talking about it? Let's get moving about it. What a terrible slogan, but that's just what it's going to be. All right, first exercise. We are going to start off lying on our back in the middle of the floor. Let me just get a view on everybody so I can make sure I'm not flying through this. Okay, so lie down on the ground. There we go. And let's have our strap close by. Okay, we are going to start out lying on our back. If you feel pretty strong and functional, if you gave yourself high ratings, then you're going to do this without your arms. But if those numbers were a little lower today, like maybe 5 or below, then I want you to do this holding your leg. Let's start out straightening the left leg on the ground, and then we're going to lift our right leg off the ground, interlace our hands behind it. Again, if you felt very strong, you're just going to hold the hip up or the leg up with your hip strength. Let's start off doing clockwise rotations with the right foot. And I want you to explore the circle that your foot can make. We aren't rushing in and out of any spot. Keep the rhythm and tempo smooth. Daryl, raise the foot a little higher so it's parallel. Nice. Good job, man. In this position, the hip and the knee are fixed. We are working on restoring the degrees of motion to the foot. If the foot functions really well, this is an effortless kind of silly exercise. We don't really feel much, just like moving our hand and fingers probably wouldn't really exhaust us. So what I want you to pay attention to is, how do these rotational muscles move, function, and feel? And what does that have to do with why you're moving and feeling the way you are? If we can get these stronger, you're going to feel it. Nice and slow. Keep that continuous motion, even if those muscles are screaming at you. Okay, same foot, switch the direction of rotation. So now we're going to go counterclockwise. And don't be afraid to get those toes involved. You've got a foot. Let's use as much movement and joints and muscles and bones as we can here. Happy toes, it looks great. Nice job, Steph. Okay, now same foot, keep it doing exactly what you're doing. Now we're just going to point and flex the foot. We're hitting multiple planes of motion. Trying to get this foot to become well-rounded again. And when it is well-rounded, again, this is going to feel pretty smooth. These are also the muscles that control a lot of how we absorb force and how we push off the ground and interact with the floor with every step. The better these work, the better you will be able to transfer energy and tension throughout your entire body. So I want everyone's personal goal over the next year to make these become pretty smooth and effortless. We'll get there, I promise. Okay, let's switch feet. So the right leg is going to go now straight down on the ground. Left leg comes up. And let's start off with counterclockwise rotation. Most likely, you probably already know which foot moves and functions better. Just a couple reps into the other side, we're going to be balancing out this function over time. A difference in the foot here equates to a difference in how the body moves. It's all about the degree of freedom. Somebody asks, why is moving in one direction harder than the other? When we talk about imbalance, I don't mean just imbalance between right and left. I don't mean just imbalance between the muscles in the front of the body and the back of the body. I also mean the imbalance between how we rotate. Some of us can rotate internally really, really well, and external rotation feels incredibly hard. An imbalance in rotation massively changes how we rotate our entire body. So someone asks why one direction is harder than the other. Well, you're feeling how you're capable of rotating one way significantly more than the other. We can call that just access to muscles, the ability for the muscles to work, probably the familiarity of how often they work, as opposed to the other ones. This exercise is not biased towards one or the other. It's going to hit them all, which is why it's one of my favorites. It's well-rounded, and that's what we need if there's torsion or any movement problem. Great question. Now let's point and flex the foot. Again, when you point and flex, let's get as much toe and arch movement. I want you to almost like cramp up the bottom of that arch. Let's get things to really, really engage here. Kristen, I want you to lower the foot just a little bit. Yeah, great. Nice job, Mark. You're going handless over there. Excellent. Nice and smooth, back and forth. It's the same motion that we need to have happen when we walk and run. Okay, great. Now let's go ahead and grab our strap. We're still gonna lay down on the ground. For this next exercise, I don't teach this in the program, so this one's gonna be new for everybody here. There's gonna be two different strap positions. We're essentially gonna be doing a calf and a hamstring stretch. The first strap position, the strap is gonna go right on the ball of the foot, right underneath the toes. So this is strap position 1. We're gonna use this to stretch our calf. When I tell you to go to strap position 2, the strap is gonna move towards the middle of the foot. So let's all get the strap towards the top of the foot, near the ball. And from here, very simple, we're gonna lay down, straighten that leg, and we kind of just want it to be a 45-degree angle, right? We're not straight up in the air, it's just about 45 degrees out, and you're holding onto the strap, and you're kind of pulling that strap back. But this isn't just a tug, I want you to engage your thigh muscles. So feel like we're getting a little bit of activation and stretch at the same time. And use both hands however you can hold this strap. See if you can almost kind of use the weight of your leg and the strap to stretch out the back of that calf and knee. If you have torsion, I would like the knee to be straight, to point the knee directly up towards the ceiling. Let's see if we can get the calf to lengthen while the knee is in basically a straight position here. Play around with what is the height that you need to feel that stretch behind the calf. And some of you might feel a stretch in the hamstring because the calf is so tight right now, and that's okay. Shoulders are gently pulled back. We're not rounding or rotating the upper body forward. Take a big deep breath and let it out. Now, let's move to strap position 2. Strap is going to go right on the middle, bottom part of the foot. And we're not just cranking and hoisting our leg upward. I want you to use your strength. So quad is engaged. The strap is just here to help you. You're not cranking on the strap. Using the strength of your right leg, slowly bring the hip to as vertical as feels comfortable. The strap is here to assist you, not do all of the work. And if you can squeeze your quad tight and use your strength to hold the leg up, like if I was there and I asked you to let go of the strap, the leg should be basically in the same position. It can drop maybe a little bit. I don't want you to move past the position that you can't control. So you're activating the leg is kind of like your safety to keep your tissue within a reasonable length, which we could talk about for a really long time after if you want. Take a deep breath. You might feel the right hip be working. That's great. Find length behind that leg. Pull those toes back and down towards you. There you go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and relax. Nice job. Slowly come out of that, and we're going to switch up feet. So again, back to strap position 1. Strap is right on the bottom front part of the foot. And again, keeping the left leg engaged, pulling those left toes back. We're using the strap to lengthen that calf. If you've got torsion, the knee is pointed straight. And you're probably going to notice if you have torsion that one side feels different than the other side. This stretch might actually feel, and I don't want to say this to be the dominant case here, but you might feel that this is less tight on the side that has the least amount of torsion. It's not always true, but most of the times. Like I said, there are always exceptions and outliers when it comes to torsion events. Front quad active, shoulders gently pulled back and down. Take a deep breath. And let's move to strap position number 2. Strap is going to go right in the middle of the foot. And again, without really using the strap, we've got the leg strength. Move your strength up as high, your leg is straight and as high as it can go. And the strap is going to be here to assist us at that range of motion. So it's not just a dead hold and it's all up to the hip. Toes pulled back. I want you to relax your way into the stretch. Breathe your way into it. Don't force your way into it. The quad being tight is key. I might want to stay here all night. That feels so good. Nice, Gretchen. Yeah, everyone looks great. Let's take another deep breath. And slowly relax. Okay, wonderful. Next 2 exercises, we're gonna be sitting up pretty close to a wall. So grab some floor and wall space. I think this might show this the best. Now, this next one does require some kind of range of motion at the ankle, knee, and the hip. So remember what I said tonight, if it doesn't feel comfortable, let's not force our way through it. I don't care if you're 4 feet away from the wall. Ideally, I want us to basically scoot our hips up close to the wall, and we're going to be in this butterfly position, this groin frog stretch. I'm only as close to the wall as I can be until I feel like my pelvis wants to like lift and curl up. So if you don't have this kind of range of motion, you can go ahead and scoot back. And if it's really just too hard for you to get into this position, you can always just do this with your feet on the ground. But let's try to get into this today. And let's have interlaced hands behind our head. And now that's excellent. Let's go over that question at the end of class tonight. Most people are going to have trouble engaging their quads because the hamstrings have become dominant. And when you engage your quads on the previous, not this exercise, but when you engage your quads, that means your nervous system has to reroute energy to the front thigh and not the back thigh. And that can be very challenging if your back thigh has been dominant for a very long time. So this exercise, specifically when it comes to torsion, we are working on essentially 2 planes of motion, actually 3: flexion, external rotation, and abduction of the hip. But more importantly, we're getting the hip, knee, and foot to learn how to kind of move to the same position without any rotation in the knee or the foot. This is essentially like we're trying to simultaneously get all of our lower load joints, the hip, knee, and ankle, to start understanding alignment and how to actually move according to their design together. So some of you might notice that, oh my gosh, the right hip is struggling big time, or this is stretching, or there's a ton of work. What you're feeling is the hip, knee, and ankle learning how to reposition themselves together. Someone writes that their right hip is so tight on this, it hurts. Will this ever go away? It'll go away when the hip is able to control a position like this. So my advice for you is back up a bit. Let's see if we can find the easiest way to be in this position. We've got another 30 seconds or so. You might be asking your hip to go well beyond its capacity to move and control. I want you to find what is the most comfortable leg angle in an uncomfortable exercise. And let's see if we can give your nervous system something a little bit more to work with. That's a great question. Hold that for the end though. Let's get the toes touching. Great. That'll definitely go away. I, years ago, couldn't even get into this position without feeling like my groin was gonna just like split. All those tight inner thigh muscles, they just had no ability to move to this range. No wonder why the hip or why the back took such a long time to heal. The hip and the leg couldn't move, just making the back do all that work. Okay, staying here on your back, and we're gonna do this nice and slow. If you need to scoot away, go ahead and scoot away. But what I'd like to do is see if we can, from here, keeping our pelvis on the ground, slowly just straighten those legs up the wall. And if you've got torsion, I'd like you to prioritize the knee being straight. Engage the quad muscles and gently just pull back the feet. If you have torsion and feel like that's really frustrating because your knees are really pointed straight back, but then feet are really twisted in or out, and that's a very frustrating experience for your nervous system right now, I want you to find a halfway. Maybe the knees are slightly rotated and the feet are slightly rotated. Maybe not one is perfectly aligned. Find something that feels manageable for you and breathe. Remember what I talked about when I was going on and on at the start of class about when we lose a degree of freedom, when the hip is unable to move, how that just immediately and massively impacts the knee and also the ankle too. That's why a lot of our exercises are going after the ankle and the hip today. If we can improve that, that knee is going to feel better. It's just a matter of time. So engage those quads, get those thighs working. Pull the feet back down towards you. Take a couple breaths. One minute left. If your tissue is really tight, you might notice some tingling. That is one of two things, probably both things simultaneously. Number one, gravity is pulling that kind of blood away from the feet, from the legs, moving back towards the rest of the body. And also tight tissue. Think about our blood has to work through our tissue. That's its job. Its job is to be delivered to the tissue. Well, if our soft tissue is tight, that's going to compress the blood's ability to circulate. And this is one of the reasons why tight muscles can affect blood pressure and circulatory function. If you're having tight muscles, you might be noticing that reduced blood flow to the feet. As your soft tissue regains function, you're going to notice you can stay here longer and longer with less and less of that maybe tingling feeling. Let's go ahead and slowly come out of that. When you're ready, I want you to meet me in the middle of your floor again. Give everybody a second. Okay. Next exercise. We're going to be lying on our back. And I want your feet to be a little far forward. Ideally, and it's okay if this isn't happening, ideally, we want to have a gentle little arch in the back. If you feel like your back is really flat, maybe the feet are probably a little too close. So kind of move those feet a little further away until you can maybe feel like there's just a little bit of lighter pressure on that lower back, little arch. The next thing I want you to do is to grab the sides of your pelvis. And what you're feeling for is where are these front pointy hip, these pelvic bones, like right over the top of our pockets, and where is my rib cage? I want you to get a sense of, is there equal space between this pelvis and the bottom of your rib cage? You might have to poke around a bit. You might have to go from the front to the back until you kind of get a sense of where the ribs are and where the pelvis is. And if you can't find it, that's okay. This might be your first time ever trying to discover that. You'll eventually find it if you just keep practicing. If you can find it, you might notice that one pelvis is higher than the other. See if you can just gently bring a little bit of space and levelness to the distance between both sides of your pelvis and your ribs. And once you have an idea of what that means and can kind of feel for that, keep your hands on your pelvis so you can identify if it really starts to shift out of position. Your pelvis is going to stay exactly in the same place throughout the entire duration of this exercise, same as your lower back. Let's move your right foot closer towards your hips by half of a step. Move your right foot into a high heel shoe position. So you're just lifting the heel off the ground,
the front of the foot is on the ground. And from here, without moving anything else, just gently lift the left foot an inch or two up and then down. Lift the left foot off the ground and down. It doesn't need to be much. We don't need massive distance. In fact, you'd get more out of it if it wasn't massive. We're just doing very gentle, simple foot lifts. We are not rocking the pelvis back. We're not tucking our pelvis or flattening our back. We're in the same position we were in before we started this exercise. And the only thing that's happening is our hip is regaining control without us having to rotate or manipulate our body at all. Very gentle, very simple. Although it might not feel like that right now. Ideally, your hip flexor works immediately and it feels strong. And this is a really simple exercise. You can keep your heel of your right foot off the ground. Your pelvis stays in the middle, meaning it doesn't drift over towards the left or the right. We can use a hip when we want to use a hip, and nothing else has to change itself for that to happen. Bring your left foot down to the ground. Bring your right foot down to the ground. Let's align both feet again. And now we're going to switch sides. Do a half step with your left foot back. Lift your left heel off of the ground like it's in a high heel shoe. And let's start lifting the right foot up just a couple inches. Up and down. Every time that foot comes down, relax for a second and then lift it up. Teach that right hip how to engage and then how to disengage. What's different about this side for you? Does the pelvis feel more secure? Or maybe just kind of, maybe not vulnerable, I don't know if that's the right word, but maybe unstable. It just kind of moves, or it wants to shift, or you have to use more of your abs naturally on this side, or your lower back feels like it's working. Maybe it feels better, more grounded. One rep at a time. Your foot in the high heel position is learning how to stabilize the leg that's moving. The leg that's moving is working without the joints twisting in another plane of motion. It's just forward and backward movement. Good. Bring the left foot down, and we're going to do the right side, the left side again. So pull the right foot back a half a step. Right foot goes into a high heel position, and let's start lifting the left foot. Keep your shoulders relaxed. I think somebody just wrote that they're noticing constant external rotation on the right hip. If I'm standing above you, I want that knee to just travel straight up and down. If you're noticing that that leg really moves, rotates in or out, you're experiencing how you're trying to do one plane of motion and your body's bringing in another one. This is where a muscle movement dysfunction can really stress other muscles. Instead of just using the hip,
we're using it while we're rotating it, meaning we can only move it with torsion, meaning so many other muscles have to be recruited to do a simple action. And this is what I'm talking about when I discuss optimal movement. We want to move in the plane that we want to move in when we want to move it. And if other planes of motion have to chime in, this is when movement can feel just exhausting, excessive, or uncomfortable. Switch legs. So now I believe the right foot's back. Oh, no, you had it right. Left foot's back. Now we're lifting the right leg. And if you're having back pain on this, if we reverse engineer that, we're asking your hip to move and your back is being recruited. We don't have to look much further as to why your back is feeling the way it is. If the hip can't be a hip and it's always recruiting your back, that's probably why standing, walking, sitting is so uncomfortable. If we can over time teach the hips to work kind of independently here and the upper body relax, the pelvis doesn't move, there's no rotation, we're going to find some pretty awesome strength and mobility come back to our lives. You're doing great, everybody. We just got a couple exercises left. These are also the muscles that pull us into a bottom of a squat. When they work really well, squat range of motion changes. Great, go ahead and relax. When you are ready, let's hop up off the ground. You don't have to hop, you can just leisurely get up. And we're gonna grab a chair, a block, and a strap. Now, ultimately, when it comes to torsion, both of these options can be helpful. When you're on your own and you do this routine later, if you're finding value in it, I want you to do the opposite choice that you did today. If your knees are rotated in, you're going to use the strap for this next exercise. If your knees are continually rotated out, you are going to use a block for this next exercise. If you don't know which is what your knee is, then I'd rather you use a strap for this. Just default to a strap. I could make up a rhyme or reason why, but it's a 50-50. We're going to try a strap, and then next time you try a block and see which one feels better. Okay. So again, if your knees rotate in, you're using a strap. If your knees rotate out, you're using a block. Let's use whatever object you have. Take a second to sit down in this chair, and I want you to slouch. There's two ways that you can sit tall that I've gone over. You can either use the strength of your upper body and your lower back and pull your shoulders back and put a lot of work into your trunk to sit tall, or you can use those muscles that we just talked to, the ones that lifted your leg. Use those muscles to roll your hips forward. And that way we sit tall without our upper back really having to work at all, or our lower back really having to work at all. If you have the block, start to squeeze your knees on and off together into the block. If you have a strap, I want you to press your legs out into that strap, on and off, as you're sitting tall through the hips. Just going to check everybody here. Nice, Mark, that looks great. Looks like you're sitting tall with those hips over there. Nice job. Nice, Daryl. And if you feel like those femurs, those knees are constantly externally rotated, that might feel like a lot of work, getting those opposite muscles to really start working. That's great. Kristen, looking great. And if you can, move those feet a little bit more forward so that shin bone is vertical. Great. Penny, alignment looks solid. Kev, like a statue over there, man. Looks great. If you're using the block, maybe the inner leg muscles are working big time. If you're using a strap, maybe those outer leg muscles are working. Regardless of which piece of equipment you used, now I want you to apply pressure on it consistently. So just firm. You're going to either gently, 25% of your strength hold the block, or 25% of your strength press out into the strap. Still sitting tall through the front of the hips. What I'm going to do next is just lift the heels up. Front of the foot stays on the ground. Heels come down, and then front foot lifts up. And I'm rocking the foot back and forth. And as I rock this foot back and forth, notice how I'm not also rocking the trunk. I'm not bringing other parts of myself into this. My shoulders are staying right over the hips, and I'm just getting this rocking chair motion with the foot. If you're doing this and it's like really shaky on one side, you're feeling that neuromuscular lack of control. Go slow to feel both sides come up and lift down. This is where we get to start training that symmetrical movement pattern. And we're doing it without torsion. The knee and femur, the femur and the lower leg are not really too rotated in a bent knee position like this. If you do have torsion, you might notice your feet are kind of slightly out. This is your opportunity to straighten the feet if you can. That feels okay for you. And every time this foot rocks up and down, that knee is changing height. As the knee changes height, you're either using the block or the strap to prime the stabilizers of the hip. So now we're actually training two planes of motion. We're training the muscles that move us forward and backwards, the flexors and extensors. Notice how the hip is flexing and extending every time the knee moves, same as the ankle. We're holding on to the block or strap. We're training the muscles in that side plane of motion, that frontal plane. We are not training rotation right now. Remember, if you have torsion, you rotate first to move. We're trying to flip that on its head right now. We are trying to flex and extend to move without rotation. So this might feel like a lot of work. Good, let it. Kristen, move those feet back another inch towards the chair. Yeah, there you go. Practice every time you come up that foot goes straight, like you're almost rolling off of that big toe. You might try to have that ankle bail out by like going over the pinky toe. Send that ankle forward, almost like if I were to come there and put like lanes around your foot. That ankle is just going right up and down the middle of that lane. Keep your upper body relaxed. Let your hips be the driver of this exercise. Everyone looks great.
And you get those ankles just a little closer together. Beautiful. And position looks great. Okay, everyone, we've got 2 more exercises left. Rotation is not the enemy. It's just what's happening at a joint. We can't just ignore it. So we are going to now build a little bit of rotation back into the hips. Let's start out sitting on the ground, and it's okay to sit this one out if it feels too intense for you. We're going to start off with our legs straight, and our hands are going to be behind us. As our hands are behind us, I want you to think about what we just did. So maybe even forget the hands for a second. Just try to sit tall as best you can. And this could be a significant amount of work right now, and that's okay. We're going to get these muscles stronger. Once you can feel like you're sitting tall, put the hands on the ground behind you, not by your side, but behind you. I'd like your hands to just support you and assist you. But if I asked you to, you could lift your hands up at any given notice because the hips are still doing the lion's share of work. So we have our hands on the ground behind us, legs straight out in front of us. Keep your quads tight, pull your feet back towards you, sit tall through the front of the hips, and rotate both legs in. Your big toes are touching. Then rotate both legs out. We're going back and forth, in and out. If you want a challenge, take your hands off the ground and sit tall. If you feel like this is already very intense, you can use those hands, no problem. Don't whip through this. Let's gently teach our muscles that we can rotate through the hip. We don't always need to twist and torque the knee. The hip controls the rotation of the leg. Keep the hands light. Sit a little taller through the front of the hips. Breathe. Okay, now let's move the feet a little wider. Now we're going to bring in another plane. Same exercise. Quads tight, feet pulled back. Sit tall through the front of the hips. Only you can determine how fast to move here. The slower you go, I promise you, the more you'll get out of it. If you want to make this harder, hands up in front of you, kind of arms folded. Dozens of muscles are figuring out how to do this right now. So it's okay if it's hard and shaky and choppy, especially if this is the first time the hips have had to rotate purely without that knee trying to twist. Okay, let's go even wider. Again, progression is arms out front. Regardless, sit tall through the front of the hips. Breathe. Now bring your legs back to the start position. We're going to do about 1 more minute of nice and slow rotations.
Might get a little hot wherever you're at. We got a lot of muscles working here. Friendly reminder, lift the hands off the ground if you need to remind those hips that they should drive this motion. We aren't shouldering our way through this. And now that looks awesome. Great job, everyone. This is tough stuff. Keep those feet pulled back. 15 seconds. Kevin, see if you can sit a little taller through the front of those hips. There you go, buddy. That's it. Nice, Cynthia. Okay, let's go ahead and relax. What do you guys think time-wise? Do you have time for one more? Can we do that? Cool, 2 more minutes. Okay, let's bring this session full circle. All right, whatever option you chose on that rocking chair, whether it was the block or the strap, grab that piece of equipment. I think I'm gonna do the strap for this one. Okay. Basically, sitting down in a chair, instead of our ankles being directly underneath our knees, I want you to slide your ankle back as far as you can before the heel pops up. So move the heel back before you feel the heel lift up. I want you to find what is that most amount of range that we can put that ankle in. And once we get that, right, if we got some pretty mobile ankles, the ankles might actually be close to touching the chair underneath our hips. Just find what feels right for you. Once we have that angle, interlace your hands together behind your head, press out on the strap or hold that block between your knees, and without shifting your upper body forward, it's going to happen a little bit. Stand up. And then sit down. Stand up and sit down. The strap might be a little tricky. You might have to tighten the strap just a little bit. And I made a little story about something like this today. Sit to stand. The strap or the block is keeping roughly equidistance between both legs. Choose a speed that you can control. We're not plopping up and jolting down. Get both sides of your body to work together. Five, four, three, two, one. Good. Take that strap off. Or drop the block. Okay. Stand up. And let's go back to what we did at the start. Take a moment to just let things settle. That was your first time training squats. That might feel a little off. It'll get better. First thing I want you to do, what does internal rotation feel like for you? Compare that to the start. If you gave yourself a 2 out of 10 at the start, what are you at right now? Is it more comfortable? Do you feel like there's more space? There's more range? There's more muscular activity? The joints feel more comfortable? Maybe the imbalance is still there, but it's slightly less. share in the comment in the chat box how it feels to internally rotate the legs and compare it to the start. If you were a 2 at a start and you're a 3 now, put +1. If you're a 5 at the start and you're a 2 now, put -3. Ooh, we got some early wins. Gretchen, +3. Kristen, +4, way more stable, no knee pain. Penny, similar. Happy Toes, 2, more even, left work on left side. Internal rotation feels good, 4, but straying along right side. Yeah, that back, if those legs aren't used to working the same, we just did squats, you're gonna feel that a little bit there. Mark, slight half of a plus point. Happy Toes, +2. Roth, +2. Anel, +4, much better. Christy, +4. Muscles, all right. Okay, now let's test external rotation. So again, kind of standing at that neutral stance. Take a second to assess, does this feel any different than it did before? More stable, more comfortable, more maybe space. Hard to put that into words. Test it. And then share it. That's exciting with the majority of people saying that with internal rotation. +1 equal 2, much more stable, more muscles activated, almost similar. Kristen, more comfortable, very fatigued. Left leg is a little shaky. Kristen, is the left side where the torsion event is happening more? +1, better, but about the same, okay? No significant difference. Yeah, Kristen, and that makes sense that the side that is shaky is the side where the torsion's on. We just basically change the degree of motion in the hip, which is great. Okay, now final test and same kind of principles here. Let's not force our way into a squat. Take a moment, get set up. What does that feel like for you? Compare it to the range. Maybe the range is the same, but you moved quicker to that range. Comfort, familiarity, rate it across all levels. And share it when you have that answer. My computer so we don't die here. Okay. Happy Toes, +3. Squat, huh? +3. Feels like my hips are rested. Barath, +4. Tom, +3. Mark, +1. We're making progress. Very much improvement. Anel, better. Kristen, +4. Touch the ground, my hands, and less hesitation. Woo, that's amazing. Gretchen, +3. Smoother. Christy, +2. What just happened? We improved the degrees of freedom in the hip and the ankle in a few ways. This was a long routine, but we really streamlined it. We improved the degrees of freedom in the hip and the ankle. We showed that those joints can move in planes of motion by themselves without having to recruit all this other variable motion. Movement's more organized here. Some of you are having +2s, +3s, +4s, significant experiences. Some of you might not notice really any change, and that's okay too. I don't expect a miraculous, big bang miracle doing a routine for the first time. Stay at it. If you think this routine makes sense and the intention of it makes sense, maybe you need to do it for another week before you have that, wait a sec, this actually does make a significant difference. You got to give your body a little bit more time and exposure to it. So everyone, great job. excellent work with this. This was a long routine, a lot of explanation heavy, but we got some great progress. We've gone about an hour and a half tonight. I'd love to stick around and answer any questions you have. Like I said, my whole point of this is to help you feel heard and supported. This process is a long road, so let's make it as enjoyable or as clear as possible what that road looks like. And for the people that have torsion on this call, what are your thoughts? And I'm not emotionally tied to this. This either hit it on the head and it made a lot of sense, or yeah, it sounded nice in theory, but it didn't really improve torsion. Share where you're at. Let's talk about why that is, or maybe what needs to be done. Steph, +2 to 3 overall with the Italian. That's Italian hand sign, right? It is in my household. Kristen, my feet, especially the side with the torsion. Wait, I lost that. There we go. Okay, my feet, especially the side with the torsion, have a mind of their own and constantly rotate out. It is very hard for me to pull my ankles back and keep a flat foot. Yeah, I don't think, Kristen, that's going to be a conscious thing that, like, I think if you could, you would. I think the feet are defaulting to that because that is like their most available option of movement, or it might be their only option of movement. It could very well feel like an actual restriction, like you're hitting a concrete wall. There's just no more joint or space or room for movement. As that muscle function changes, that will happen over time. So, Kristen, if you were a +1 in how the rotation standing or how squatting felt, and this is now the routine that you really start to adopt, I think it's going to be a matter of time until you start having a window of, oh, wait a second, I actually can move my feet. You're going to have more pathways of movement open up because you're not calling upon just that twisting mechanism to move. You now have that forward, backward, side to side. The other planes of motion are going to show up, which should alleviate the transverse, the twisting. Tom, thank you so much for everything. I got to head out. Awesome routine overall. I will be doing it again 100%. Love it. Love to hear that, Tom. And let me just check something really quick. Okay. Kristen, way more understanding of torsion, and it was great to hear before the exercises. Good. I'm glad that 20-minute setup was helpful to frame up what that is. And I think when you can look at torsion as a reaction to a degree of freedom not happening in the hip or the ankle, it almost like eases the pressure of it almost eases that acute focus of just, hammering and zooming in on the knee, and to realize, like, wait a second, I really got to look at the whole leg here. What's happening in the entire leg? And I think when you can kind of zoom out, you just get to see more answers or ask more questions instead of zooming in on this really fixed focal point that almost sometimes kind of puts horse blinders, and we get really obsessed about the VMO or all the other cues that are associated with knee torsion. Barath, I could remove the rolled towel under my hips, felt the ground after a long time. That's great. I love hearing that from you. Kev, subscap and right side mid-back strain happened during seated strap press. Figured they are working in place of my hip flexors. Well, Kev, if you did that without the seated strap press, those squats without the seated strap press, you would have probably moved, most likely, your right leg out to the side. Your right leg would have deviated that plane of motion. So instead of that flexion extension response, we would have done flexion extension and external rotation. The pelvis would have shifted into an unlevel or upwards rotation. And then you probably wouldn't have felt your back because we've shifted the body to not have those paraspinals actually stabilize your spine equally on both sides. by you fixing the leg position, and now both femurs are pointed and held, literally held by the strap in the same position, and then you're getting flexion extension, what you're going to find is you're using that which you probably would not have used by bailing out through the other plane or degree of motion. Doing a fixed leg exercise can be very rewarding, and it can yield a lot of results, but it can also yield frustration because it makes muscles work that haven't had to work, or they've always had the ability to not work for a really long time. So you might notice just with that one set, a ton of erector soreness in the mid back, paraspinal soreness. You might notice it might be actually really kind of stiff or hard to rotate because you just ask those back muscles to do things they're just not used to yet. Or not yet, but maybe haven't worked without limiting that compensation of the right hip in some time. Could be left hip, but most of the time it's gonna be the right. Christy, this routine was work for me, especially the hip opposite of the knee with torsion. Feels good, but I don't understand what's causing the torsion. Okay, Christy, can I unmute you? Is that okay? You can send me a message if it's not. I want to chat with you. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so first of all, it would be weird if you had torsion and this routine was like this effortless knife through butter, just no work. The level of work is indicative of the level of severity. So if this was really hard, we're probably getting very close to why there's torsion, because these muscles do not operate in their assigned role and plane of motion. We don't even have to get academic or break down joint by joint motion. If we just use your experience getting basic muscles to do their basic function, if that was challenging, that can very well set the stage for why there's torsion present or significant torsion present. And we can probably equally say that the torsion's not going to change until this routine becomes easier for you, more available. Like it's not a shock to the neuromuscular system of them having to organize and coordinate movement like this. I would probably say your experience, if we reverse engineered exercise by exercise, what you felt and the level of intensity and where the work is, that those muscles having a difficult time working have equally not been able to support the knee joint. If I'm assuming the torsion's in the knee, yeah?
Yeah.
So then they most likely have not been able to support the knee joint, which just kind of created that breeding ground for that torsion event to just naturally occur. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I guess I just sort of expected that I would find some like weakness on my left side, the side that has torsion. And the only thing that was difficult was the frog. Like my hip on the left was like tight, but everything else seemed like it was on the right.
You're noticing something really interesting to talk about. This is why not once in the program, regardless of how severe imbalance there is, why I never ask you to hold one side longer or to do one thing different on one side. If there's a torsion event on your left side, that has not just isolated on a leg, detached from Christy's body for X amount of years. Your torsion event on the left side could be a response from a degree of function and motion missing on your right side. You could actually have phenomenal, all normal marks of movement, control, and function on that left side, yet the right side's dysfunction is causing that torsion to happen with every step. One example of this, and I don't want to just like start talking word walls here. I'll try to take a step back and show this. Okay, So let's say let's not say it, your torsion event is on that left side, internal, external, it's rotated. The dysfunction's on the right side. Let's say the right side is unable to actually go into extension, and when we extend, we're not able to internally rotate. When I step my left leg forward, when I'm walking, when that leg steps forward, the pelvis moves in the direction of that leg. This is the pelvic rotation when we walk. So our pelvis has this nice rotation to it. When I bring my left leg forward, the pelvis is rotating this way. If that means that that right hip has to extend and internally rotate. If I'm missing that degree of motion, and this is just one example to kind of frame up how a dysfunction on the right side can create a torsion event on the left. If I'm lacking that ability for that right hip to extend and internally rotate, for the pelvis to go this way, to take a step with that left leg, what's going to happen is I can offset that. If my pelvis can't rotate, maybe I can tweak my hip. Maybe I can torque my foot. I can manipulate my left leg to make up for the fact that I can't move through this right hip. It always takes two. Whether or not your left side torsion was caused by a dysfunction on the left side, or it is responding left side torsion to a dysfunction on the right side. It always takes two legs to create any imbalance. Whether or not one side is incredibly tighter, weaker, stronger, looser, more twisted, it's always the other side that has something to do with that. One example, if you squat, both legs should work together. When one side becomes overpowered, somebody will shift their body weight, the majority of their body weight, to that side. That's what can create an asymmetrical shift when squatting. Well, which leg is the problem? Is it the right leg that's more powerful and takes over the work? Or is it the left side that's weaker and doesn't know how to work? It's both. Where physiotherapists can sometimes lead people down this like never-ending cycle and circle is by seeing, and I don't even mean to call it a physio, it's just all movement practitioners, is seeing an asymmetrical weight shift, seeing how that right side takes over and saying, oh, left side's weak, let's go strengthen the living heck out of that left side. If you're not reducing that power and getting both sides to work together, that squat's not going to change, because that right side is still going to just dominate it. Sure, the left side's stronger, but the nervous system still, the problem still exists. It doesn't know how to control both sides. So when you talk about a right side being a lot harder, it was more intense, that has a lot to do with that torsion event on the left side.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. That makes me happy that makes sense, because that can be a very long conversation if you want it to be, and I'd love to have that with you. Bottom line, I'm not surprised when I hear that, knowing how both sides are always in this constant dynamic interplay with one another. Arnell, need to go. Vinny, thank you so much. I know you're not here, but you're welcome. Gretchen, decades of torsion created a neuroma in my foot. An orthotic helps keep me out of pain. How do I eventually move away from orthotic? I think the easiest way to frame an answer for that is how you move away from anything that you've relied on. It's not by cold turkey. You're not cutting up that orthotic and throwing it away. What we're going to do, and almost an easier way to frame that too, is think about like a opioid addiction, or think about some kind of like a sleeping aid addiction, or some kind of medicine like that. We don't just want to quit that cold turkey. It changes the body too fast, and the body will tend to react in sometimes very unpredictable ways. What you want to do is you want to slowly reduce it. So if you wear that orthotic 24/7, 7 days a week, maybe you do a routine that helps you move and feel better, that kind of reduces that torsion or gives you the ability to rotate and just, you feel like it just opens up your movement. Do a routine to have access to better function, and then not wear an orthotic for an hour afterwards. Not much. We're not looking to have a huge, massive win right now, just an hour. And then you put the orthotic back on. But you do that daily. And then an hour turns in hour and 15, and then an hour and 30. And then you slowly wean off of that orthotic. As your function improves, your body gets used to not wearing that orthotic afterwards. You get to start to retain that optimal movement or the reduction in torsion longer. That might also be too significant and severe to have an orthotic or not. That actually might be too cold turkey. So if the orthotic is custom orthotic, then maybe it's getting a slightly reduced orthotic. There's different stages, there's different grades. So instead of maybe having a very strong orthotic that holds that foot precisely in either pronation or supination, however your orthotic is designed, we find a less aggressive one, and we just wear that less aggressive, less sturdy one that corrects. And we start to slowly get that soft tissue to understand how to remodel itself so we can move without an orthotic one day. It's going to be slow, and it's going to be very methodical, and we have to be a scientist playing with durations, just chunks and bits at a time. Let me know if you'd like me to elaborate. Penny, torsion side. Okay. When we straighten both legs up the wall, I gain alignment. However, my right foot everted out, more contact of little toe side, a foot in contact with the wall. When internal rotation, straight legs on floor, the wider I set my legs out, the leg internal rotation on right side felt like it was lateral quad and TFL stopping me. Good news, that's great. Notice in those straight leg rotations how I didn't just do the entire exercise with straight leg rotation in that straight position. Remember at the start how I said there's 3 different planes of motion? When you introduced the legs widening, you ran into more limitation, correct? Okay. And you felt like there was more dysfunction, or I'm going to take you off mute really quick. I just want to make sure I got this so I can answer this appropriately. When you moved more into that lateral, that frontal plane, when you widened your legs, you noticed the restriction increase?
Yes, correct. Yep.
Oh,
I felt like it
okay.
was almost pinching up in the top of the outside of the hip. TFL up.
What does that tell you?
That it's restricted up there.
And what plane of motion showed you that restriction?
The coronal, taking abduction.
Okay. So where's the opportunity here?
So to increase the abduction, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like I actually take it up into my QL when I go to take my leg out. It's almost like my pelvis can't stay stable and just allow that leg to swing out. It's almost like I do want to hike it up, and I do have quite a lot of discomfort there in the hip and like the QL on the right side. It feels like it just all wants to move as a block.
Right. If we look at just old school cadaver anatomy, that QL, its attachment and insertion aids that frontal, that abduction, adduction plane of motion. It is the lateral rotator of the pelvis. It's also the lateral stabilizer of the spine. If you're noticing that abduction is exposing a deficiency, a dysfunction, that's a really strong indication that abduction is the plane of motion that then helped torsion keep you moving. The lack of ability to abduct the hip functionally, whether it's adducted or abducted, then would introduce, you still have to move somehow. You've then compensated by your lack of abduction control, you've made up for by increasing your transverse, your horizontal control. So instead of your, and this might be technical and out of actually being helpful, instead of your hip and leg being able to move around a sagittal axis, you've found a way to just move around a vertical axis instead. It's like you've flipped planes and axis of rotation. How we fix that could be, I don't think it's going to be just like that exercise, but us getting more comfortable with abduction. And maybe that exercise, you start here, you do those femur rotations, and you just go a little wider. And we don't force our way into restriction where the QL is taking over and the whole thing's moving as a block. But can we start to just get some of that rotation in? Now, the modification for you, and I don't know if it's going to be a progression or regression. You're going to find that out real quick. We did that today with the hips in a flex environment. You can still do this with the hips in extension. That might be a really great exercise for you to start getting more range of motion and function in that plane. And then we can start to reduce how your knee is rotating around that vertical axis.
Okay. So loosening up that area with a ball or something isn't necessarily something you would advise before you did it. It's more just easing into the movement rather than encouraging the softening of the tissue that feels like it's restricting it, I suppose. But I've done that a lot for the last 4 years, so clearly that's not the answer.
Yeah, I don't know if it is the answer. Using hard tools to manipulate soft tissue can be helpful. There's some times where I don't want to do a full routine. I just ran a 15-20 mile run. I just want a foam roller. I'm exhausted. Like, I want something to help me do some kind of change for me. There's a place for self-myofascial release. I'd say try it and then try it without it. What actually helps you feel like you're achieving movement more in that area? Ultimately, manipulating the tissue alone isn't enough to create the change because it's an outside stimulus, which can be a catalyst of change for internal. But if you, at the end of the day, are not reinforcing that control and exploring those planes of motion, it's just a matter of time until we just literally go right back to the same thing, and we have to keep using the same roller, and we're just on this cyclical process of trying to beat out these tight muscles. There is also, I don't know how viable this is. I don't know how true it is. It's just a thought, and I haven't really found literature or studies against it. When we use tools to manipulate our soft tissue, we're kind of just picking and choosing which tissue we affect. Isn't that in and of itself creating imbalance? Because we're not treating all tissue the same. We're just treating some tissue with compressive load. And we could justify that we're treating the tight tissue with adhesions, and we're maybe being very precise on how we're targeting that, but it does affect cellular function somehow in some way. That's why we feel a difference after rolling. If we're always rolling the same muscle, how does that reshape the nervous system? And how does that reshape the sensory system that controls the nerve or that gives feedback? I don't know those things. It's not clear, and it hasn't really been studied. I think it can create on-the-spot changes, but I think it can also create potential other movement issues. I think that if the tissue could move, it would. So applying forces to then loosen it up, it almost kind of opens up ranges of motion that we don't really have control in. and it just kind of creates other variables is what I'm saying. And I don't know how those variables play out. Before I got into what I teach now, I was like foam rolling king over here. I had the protocols for all of it. It's what we did in all sessions with people, 20, 30, 40-minute foam roll sessions. And after going really hard down that route for years, I never really felt better. I still couldn't squat and move and bend forward. I got really good at rolling muscles out and finding that inhibited release. My clients got really great at getting that relax at the end of a day with tight muscles, but they were still like limping into appointments, not moving any better. So I don't know. I think not to be like a contrarian or anything, but I don't know if targeting muscle release through compressive forces does what we want it to do. I think it sounds nice, and there's great literature that says it does create a mechanical change or a neural change. I just don't know what that does big picture long term.
Yeah.
So explore, play with it. Let's not go hard one way or another. Was that helpful? Did that address what you were talking about? Okay. Mark, in the legs up the wall hold, I feel like I'm going to fall over to my right, and the left foot is higher than my right. It is also difficult to contract my left quad. Okay, so legs up the wall, falling over to the right, left foot is higher. First thing that comes to my mind is the level of pelvic rotation. So standing, I'll use this kind of as an example. So if I'm standing and both back sides of the pelvis are touching the wall, my pelvis is not rotated. If I rotate my pelvis around a vertical axis, one side of the pelvis is going to be more forward than the other, right? So pelvic rotation. Not only can the pelvis rotate, but one side can also tip anterior or more forward than the other. If you've got rotation and a tilt disparity, like one side is tipped forward or backward more than the other, it might set up. I'm going to show you with bent knees first. That might make the most sense. Let's see if this. Okay, so notice how, try to move the feet out of the way. Hold on a sec. Okay, notice how when my knees come together, they're level. You could put a leveler across that because the pelvis is not rotated, hiked up, or tipped forward. Keeping my pelvis on the ground, if I just rotate it or tip one side forward, notice how, oh God, I'm gonna get a cramp. Hold on. It is not used to doing that. Notice if I rotate my pelvis, hike it up on one side, I'll try to move my feet out of the way. Now I have, oh God, I can't run this much and do that. That's brutal, but I care about you, so I'm gonna sit through it. The left knee is now higher. If I were to then go legs straight up the wall, because of that pelvic position being rotated, yeah, it makes sense why you're going into this position. Your pelvis is almost already pointed this way. So now your legs up the wall. It makes sense why you want to do that. I, for the longest time, was told by chiropractors and doctors and many people that I had a leg length discrepancy. It was just pelvic rotation. It had nothing to do with the legs actually being different, and everything was twisting and rotating because the pelvic position was twisted and rotated. So if you feel like you're falling over and you feel a muscular imbalance, that's what we're trying to train in that position. My advice for you is to not go so close up to the wall. Let's scoot back at least a couple inches. I want you to find almost like what is the easiest angle, what is the easiest way to be in that position without things shifting, falling, or moving off to the side. And that might be like what I started out as in with my legs, they were almost on the ground. I had almost no ability to flex the hip. Otherwise, I was just rotated. The other thing about that position too is you were in a very flexed, closed hip position. If both hips cannot flex the same, you're going to expose that rotation, right? Scoot a little further away from the wall. Let's take the hips a little bit out of flexion. Let's lessen that so we can kind of create a little bit more of space, joint capsule space there. And we might be able to actually soften that rotation. You won't feel like you're falling out to the side. It being difficult to contract your left quad is another sign of pelvic rotation. This goes to Kristen, I think what we were kind of talking about last week about like quad activation and us trying to target quads. For your quads to work, crucially depends on the position of your pelvis. If your pelvis is hiked up, rotated, or tilted differently on one side than the other, it's going to reduce the ability for the quads to actually fire. This is what creates also another shift or twisting when squatting. So do what you can. It's going to be harder for a while until that rotation can come out of the pelvis and the quad can just start working the way it's designed to, in the position and the length it's designed to. I don't know if that was incredibly helpful. I think that was just a lot of words without helping you, but I hope it was. Penny, oh, got it. The wider legs, less internal rotation. I think we covered that. Again, it makes sense. You go into a different plane and rotation significantly changes. Okay, a lot of people need to head out. I get it. We're going long tonight. I'll deal. We'll do one more question here. Kristen, with the program and the exercises, do I lean more towards keeping the knee in alignment or the feet? Does it differ depending on the movement? Which, if you could choose, I don't even know if this is a valuable question to ask you. If you could choose, which joint do you feel like has better function, the foot or the hip? I'm gonna unmute you.
That's a loaded question. I would say
I don't even know if the answer is helpful.
I think my hips are more dysfunctional than my feet or my ankle. I think my ankles are just kind of like the byproduct of what's going on up above. So, but it's interesting. Like, for example, when I do the assisted runner stretch, when I go to pop up, I can, one side I can do it no problem. The other side I have to like grab onto the chair, lean over, and like slowly push myself up. It's so hard for me to stand up in the assisted runner stretch position. And then when I do, if my left leg is behind my right leg, I look down at it and my knee is completely turned inward and my foot is outward. So it's like, do I keep my knee towards the chair, or do I like try and straighten my knee and then let my foot go out, flare out when I'm in the assisted runner stretch, or how should I do that?
Yeah, I think it's going to be probably meet in the middle.
Okay.
Let's, I can, for me to prioritize the, okay, I think what makes it hard to answer is I think there might be value in doing both at different times. I think it might be valuable for you to sometimes keep the foot straight and sometimes keep the knee straight. And I think it might be valuable for you to not have an either or, one straight or the other, but us to find what is kind of like, maybe they're both they're both not straight, one's not straight, but they're both not twisted out. Like, can I find kind of a middle ground of that? I don't think there is a, oh, do that, your hip is always straight, your knee is always straight. I don't think a realistic answer actually lives in that hard of a rule.
Okay.
You're dealing with this living, breathing organism that creates a lot of motion in a lot of different angles and planes. I think it's like, let's explore a variety of it. And in our well-rounded exploration, can we try to move towards, over time, actually getting to the place where they can both do it? used to think very like polarizing. If a hip is always externally rotated, let's crank on internal rotation. It was always opposites. And there is a world in which and exists. Let's sometimes have the knee straight and let's sometimes have the foot straight. And I want you to feel, I think you should know which one just feels more productive for you, which one feels better, and you're not like panicking and stressed and all of a sudden movement like hurts and things are weird and uncomfortable. I'm sure with enough playfulness in that approach, one of them is going to present itself as, this feels more right when I kind of have things a little bit more in or the knee a little bit more straight. And then we just give it time to really get that hip to function more or that foot to function more. And that's what reduces the torsion. Your torsion event could come from the dysfunction in the hip. It could come from the dysfunction in the foot. And in many cases, it's coming from both, and they're interplaying with each other. Like I said, that knee is that interdependent joint that relies on both of those structures above and below it. I think the answer is both.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, it's almost, it'd be almost more relieving if it was like one or the other, I'm sure.
Yeah, but it never is with this kind of thing. So I'm just kind of back to like listening to my body again and not getting the answer from another person, which is a lesson in itself. So, but
how annoying is that?
But it was actually really helpful last week when you had a couple different cues. I've never lifted my toes like in the seated squat position against the wall. So that was kind of interesting to feel that. And then when you had said, you had reminded us to keep our feet on the floor. So that's like another happy medium. So if I keep my foot on the floor, obviously I can't do a whole lot with my knee rotating outwards. So that makes sense to kind of find the balance between like, all right, let's keep your foot stable versus, you know, just keeping your knee in alignment for the sake of it aligning with your hip. And then hopefully the foot follows later, if that all makes sense. But like kind of little things to listen to my feet hopefully will help me kind of find that balance.
Yeah. And you know, not to like throw more like complexity on this. You know, when we walk and the foot's on the ground, that's what controls a lot of that leg function. But as soon as that foot lifts off the ground and that leg it's called open chain movement, it's free floating, then the hip controls the movement of the leg. And it's this constant back and forth of the hip controlling the leg and then the foot directing the hip. And that's why the answer is it's going to take restoring both, because they're both having that interplay every step.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. I think that's good, unless there is a burning, pressing question on anyone's end. That was a great class tonight, and hope it was helpful and shed light on something or connected at least one dot that you're experiencing. Mark, you're welcome. Thanks for showing up and sitting with me for over 2 hours tonight. Gretchen, you're welcome, and I'm glad you learned a lot. We could have like the next 8 classes be about this, and there would just be more and more. There's a lot to learn, and maybe we do that. Maybe it's the month of torsion. Happy Toes, you're welcome. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to be uploading this class for your future reference. Give me a day or so for the 2-hour-long video to actually upload. So with that being said, everyone have a great night, and I'll chat with you all later. Bye.